All right. Today, thank you everybody. Today is Wednesday, May 18th, 2022. My name is Dr. Alexander Bellas from Krista McAuliffe Middle School in Boynton Beach, Florida, along with my co-host, Miss Juliana Lopez Candelaria, a sophomore at Park Vista High School, and also Madden Petrell, another sophomore at Park Vista High School. We are joined by several of our administrators from the school district of Palm Beach. And welcome, everybody. I want to take a moment to welcome each and every one of you to the 2022 interview with author, activist, poet, playwright, philanthropist, provocateur, all the way from Santa Fe, New Mexico, Miss Sallie Bingham.
Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be here.
Sallie, we're so happy to see you. Thank you so much for taking time to meet with us. The students assembled here have traversed a labyrinth of challenges. To be considered, they had to submit a question and submit it on time, along with a release. And several kids dropped out, several kids are in, and these are the 10 questioners that we currently have. You have a list of their questions already, and we're going to get rolling. Just before we go, I just want to say a few things. Sallie, are you going to say this one?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So thank you so much for joining us. Sallie, this week you published your 16th book, Little Brother. And for your 17th book, you provided us in Dr. Bellas's class, Captives, which a pre-publication of that book. In that book, you discuss a captivity narrative about your 18th century ancestor who was captured and lived with the Shawnee tribe. I was wondering, since most captivity stories are usually a political commentary or a different, unique way of exploring history, what was your purpose in writing Captives? What was the message you were trying to get across?
That's a very good question. Margaret, this is the story of Margaret and her years with the Shawnee in the late 18th century, had a very different experience from what most of the captivity narratives give, because the other captivity narratives are really about white women who, when they were picked up by the tribes all over the country, were very unhappy, didn't want to be there, tried hard to convert these people to Christianity, which usually didn't work too well, as you could imagine. So very negative about Native Americans. And we've gotten used to that negativity about many groups in this country. So I wanted to write a different kind of story about Margaret, who really learned so much from 4 years with the Shawnee, was adopted into the tribe, had a hard life there, but no harder than anybody else in the tribe, wasn't raped, wasn't tortured. Really, I think would have preferred to stay there for the rest of her life, because when you think what life would have been like in the colonies in the 18th century, really the Shawnee life was certainly no harder and in some ways easier, because there was so much cooperation between the women. That's really the way these camps were able to survive. The women did just about everything. They didn't hunt, but they did everything else. And so Margaret wasn't just working alone the way she would have been back at home in West Virginia. She was always with a group of women. And if she didn't understand something, they would help her. They would teach her. They dressed her in new clothes. They did everything they could to make her life bearable there. So that's a story you don't hear very much. We are very prejudiced about the Native Americans. I'm sure some of you know what that's like. And therefore, we often don't really know the more positive side of these stories.
Sallie, have you had a chance to review some of the questions? And
I
is there one or two that might be sticking out for you right now?
I'm very impressed overall. These are really terrific, sophisticated, complicated questions. So I'd like to answer all of them, but we won't have time. So I would like to answer, I'm not going to pronounce this right. Aliyah?
Alfia?
Well, maybe that's it. Alfiyah.
Alfia. Go ahead, Alfia.
Here, wait.
The question was, what makes you a provocateur? Does everybody know what the meaning of that word is? It's basically somebody who provokes other people. I'm sure some of you provoke other people, maybe more than you intend. What makes me a provocateur is that my political point of view is not the usual one for a white upper class woman in the US today. I really think the great issue today is social justice. I'm not interested in all the perks that go along with having money. I'm interested in doing whatever I can. At the moment, as you know, the great struggle in this country is to keep choice for women, to keep abortion legal. And I remember what it was like in the 1950s when it was illegal and you were really taking your life in your hands if you needed an abortion and there wasn't a doctor you could go to. So being a provocateur really means going against the grain often. Now, there are people who agree with me. I'm not, thank God, the only person, but I'm not part of the white upper class mainstream. And for me, that's what being a provocateur means. And I've been a provocateur certainly since my early 20s. So it's a long time. Should I answer another question, or do you want to?
Absolutely. Let's keep going.
Okay. All right, Brendan. How would you react if you were put in the situation that Margaret was in? That's a really good question because I don't think I would thrive the way Margaret did. Well, why is that? First of all, my life in the 21st century has been, in terms of the amount of physical labor I do, very easy. I don't have to go out into the fields and plant. I don't have to harvest. I don't have to dress a deer brought in from being shot by the men. So I never have had to do that kind of hard physical labor. And therefore, it would have been a much more tough transition for me because I would have found myself really exhausted. And I think Margaret was tired sometimes, but on the other hand, she had learned to do a lot of these tasks back at home in West Virginia. For instance, you'll remember from the manuscript you have that she was the one who had to haul water. Not an easy job to haul 2 big buckets of water slung on a wooden yoke across your shoulders. So she was tough and strong in a way that I'm really not. I wish I were more tough and strong physically, but those demands haven't been made of me. And I think some of you today probably would wonder too how you would feel about a life of hard physical labor. I hope.
She had just given birth to a baby as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I did remember in your book, both the Western frontier women and the Native American women were in the fields working right up till birth and relatively.
Absolutely. And you'll remember from the manuscript that the tradition among the Shawnee is when a pregnant woman was about to give birth, they would take her out to a very lonely and isolated place and build a little shelter with some tree limbs and leave her there for a number of weeks. So she had to cope not only with having the baby alone, but surviving with the baby for a couple of weeks. And you can imagine that would not have been easy. It was part of their way of making women be really accountable for their children. There was nobody else to turn to. There was no doctor. There was no midwife. She had to do it all by herself. Very demanding, as you can understand. And she came through it bravely. Baby was fine. Baby grew up to be John. You will read about John. So that was, again, something that she would not have experienced firsthand, but she did know a lot about being in a remote place and having to take care of yourself.
Let's go to another question.
Okay, shall I choose another one?
Good.
All right, let me see. They're all so good. I'm just impressed. Okay. Now this is from Esther. Where is Esther?
Esther, are you there? Can we see who all is in there?
Esther is not here.
Esther is not there.
She's not here. All right, then I won't ask that question. Ruth. I know Ruth is here. Yeah, there's Ruth. When did you start writing and what made you want to write? Well, I started writing when I was probably in second or third grade. I was very much encouraged by my parents to be a writer. They were journalists, but they really didn't want me to think about journalism. They wanted me to write fiction. My first writing were plays. And if you read those plays today, you'd think, I don't know who would want to do these plays because they're all about ghosts and witches and people running around with white sheets over their heads and so on. But that was the way I began. And I noticed that I was very pleased to get some other kids to pay attention to what I was writing because I was persuading them to actually act these plays. So that was the way I started. Then by the time I was in high school, I was writing short stories. I've always loved short stories. Does anyone here read short stories? I don't know if they're part of your curriculum.
Yes.
Oh, good. Oh, that's good to hear. I'm glad to know that. Anyway, one of the short stories I wrote in high school won a prize. So, you know, whenever you get a little recognition and a prize, well, that encourages you to keep going. So I kept on writing short stories, and I'll continue to write short stories for the rest of my writing career. There's Jeremiah, who's just come in. Hi, Jeremiah.
Hi, Jeremiah. Would somebody just like to ask a question from the floor, Brianna or anybody else? Aisel, would somebody like to ask a question? Go ahead.
So we all know that Reddit.
Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
It's gonna play audio feedback through there.
Yeah.
And we'll go here.
I can't hear anything. Uh-oh. I can't hear anything.
Come on up here.
There.
Let's go up there.
Okay.
It's gonna be even harder to unmute.
Here.
So we all know that writing is not an easy task. So how do you balance it with your personal life?
Well, I think I don't. my adult children would probably say, oh, she's way too busy writing and she should have more time to do things with us and so on. But the way I try to balance it, just the way all of you all try to balance it, is by staying really healthy. I'm constantly exercising. I hike a lot. I do some yoga. I do Pilates. I try to eat very well. I cook for myself, and I'm largely a vegetarian. And I try to have some kind of a spiritual life. And I think that's essential. I meditate just about every day to try to calm down my restless mind so I can focus and concentrate. And if you develop those habits early, the way I did, and develop the habit of spending a lot of time alone, which I love, but I think when I was your age, I probably didn't, because, you know, we're social beings and we love being with other people. But in order to accomplish anything as a writer, you have to be comfortable by yourself, because it's not something you can do in a crowd of people. I've been very fortunate. I'm very healthy. I'm 85, but I'm very strong. I haven't had any major illnesses in my life. So part of it is luck, but a lot of it is discipline, just like everything else.
So you say you write a lot and you don't spend as much time with other people. How much do you actually write in the day?
Well, I write every day. Now, what I'm writing every day is in my journal, first thing in the morning. So it's probably only about 200 or 300 words. It's not anything I intend ever to publish. It's just my way of keeping my hand moving with the pen. So even on days when I'm not doing any other writing, I will do that. Right now, I'm very busy getting ready for 3 workshops I'm teaching next month. In are in memoir writing, and one of the things I try to teach my students, they're mostly adults, is to learn something about the historical context. All our lives are very much influenced by what is going on around us, both in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our towns, in our countries, even in the world. And sometimes people writing memoir get so absorbed in telling their story that they tend to forget that the big world is very much involved in everything that happens to them. So I'll be teaching those 2 workshops in June, and then a new workshop called How to Write an Obituary. All of you know what those are, right? And the point is to write an obituary about someone who has been left out. Because a lot of people died, I'm sure you know some, and there is no obituary. They're not considered important enough. And therefore, I want to consider all of that. What do we mean when we say someone is important? What do we mean when we say someone deserves to be remembered after death and other people don't deserve it? Those are really difficult and complicated questions. As you know, most of the people who are left out of obituaries don't come from the class that I represent. They're usually people with darker skin colors, maybe coming from another country as immigrants, people who've had a real struggle to be accepted, and not having an obituary is sort of the last way of not accepting them. They weren't accepted during life, and now they're not accepted in death. So I'm hoping that this class will really open up the possibility that if you know someone who has died and there's no obituary, you will write an obituary and try to get it into whatever your local newspaper is. There's also, I learned, a website called Legacy. I don't know much about it, but they claim that they will get an obituary published just about everywhere. I think they probably charge some money, which isn't quite right. But anyway, that's my hope, because I think most of us feel, well, if somebody else doesn't write it, how am I going to write it? How am I going to persuade a newspaper editor that this person's life really did matter? So right now, for the next couple of weeks, that's what I'm going to be doing. I won't be doing any of my own writing. I'll be in the position of one of our well-known novelists said, instead of working on my own terrible manuscripts, I'll be working on other people's terrible manuscripts.
What about you out there in the crowd? As we're talking, would you like to ask a question? Go ahead, Josue. We have another kid coming over. This is Juliana's brother, actually.
Oh.
According to your biography, you've been publishing since 1961. At what point in your career did you feel the least motivated to keep on writing, and how did you overcome it?
Ooh.
Oh my, no question about it. When I had my first son, I was in my early 20s. I didn't have much experience with babies or children, and it was very absorbing and fascinating. And I really did have trouble hanging on to my discipline and my routine. I think everybody who has a child faces that, particularly women, that this is not going to be easy, not only because we have no affordable childcare in this country, which I think is a crime, but also because if you tend to be very absorbed in a new baby, and therefore it takes up the brain space that you would be using for your own writing. What finally got me out of that is that my then husband convinced me to leave this baby for about 3 weeks so we could go on a vacation. I didn't want to do it. I don't think it was the right thing to do, but it did remind me that I had a life as a writer before this baby was born, and that I would have a life as a writer eventually when I got this new experience more or less absorbed and organized.
Sallie, in your biography, or in your bio, there are at least 2 times when you went to a writer's colony. And I
Yes.
think a writer colony experience, and as you've mentioned, writing can be an isolating type of activity. What can you tell us about the writer's colony? I mean, that could be a concept very foreign to people to think about, but writing is a very challenging job. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it was very important to me. It was also what later on, when my 3 sons were teenagers, gave me a fresh start. You have to apply. There are many writers' colonies. The 2 that I applied to are quite well known. One is in southern Vermont. One is in upstate New York. And if you're accepted on the basis of what you've been able to write, you're given for free. You don't pay anything. A studio, beautiful little cabin in the woods, and that's where you spend your days, and you don't get to leave to have lunch because lunch is brought to you in a picnic basket. So if you're not writing, you're really in a bad place, because what are you going to do all day? And then in the morning and in the evening, you go back to the main house and you have breakfast with everybody and dinner with everybody. So it's ideal in that you're alone all day. You don't have to worry about paying. And then you have the companionship of other writers and painters and musicians in the morning and in the evening. It's really ideal. They're very hard to get into. And that's unfortunate, because I think there are many other writers who would really benefit from having those weeks.
Somebody else, Brianna, Madeline, did you have some questions you wanted? Brendan, go. You can go.
Brendan has something.
You want to go from there or over here? He's coming. Okay.
Good.
So, what were your first impressions about the story when you first encountered it?
Could you say that again? I couldn't quite hear.
Microphone.
How did you feel about the story once you first encountered it?
Captives, you mean?
Yeah,
What did I feel about it?
yeah,
Is that right?
Yes.
yes.
Yeah. Well, I felt a great deal of admiration for Margaret. And of course, I wasn't trying to make her into an angel. She wasn't, any more than any other human being is. But I was so interested in the fact that in a very difficult, unfamiliar environment, she was able to adapt. As you know, that's a great challenge for all of us, to adapt in a strange and foreign environment. And she was able to rely on her skills to earn her place there, because the Shawnee were not interested in someone who was just going to sit there and eat their food and not contribute anything. But because she knew a lot about sewing, she was able to make shirts for these men. And because she was literate, she was able to begin to teach some of the children to read and write. So she wouldn't have done very well if she didn't have those skills. And that interested me a great deal too. You know, we all need to find or develop skills that will allow us to survive in maybe a very hostile and strange situation. And that's something modern life doesn't really emphasize. But if any of you have ever gone camping, has anyone done camping in this group out in the woods?
Yes.
You know that if you manage to wander off the trail and get lost, you're going to have to figure out what to do. And there isn't anybody there to save you, and your cell phone has no reception, and you're going to have to figure out how to stay warm and how to eat and how to find water. So it's not as though in modern life everything is taken care of. It's not taken care of. And also, when you get into a situation where you feel you're not understood and you feel people are maybe not very friendly, you have to figure out, how do I deal with this? Do I just give up and go away, or do I try to engage people in conversation? These can be daily challenges, not quite what Margaret had to deal with, but other kinds of challenges. Oh, that interested me a great deal in her story.
Well, I thought it was interesting that they did not choose to keep Agatha, but they chose to keep Margaret. And Margaret really did earn her place there. And when she does give birth, they leave her out, and she has the baby standing up, which I thought was something really. I found that part of the book where she's giving birth all by herself. I thought it was very tough. I mean, tough
It is
to
powerful.
and
And you know,
illuminating to read about that method of childbirth.
yeah, and actually, in most of the centuries of our civilization, it was the habit for women to stand up. I think the belief was that we could push a little more if we were standing up instead of lying on our backs. So maybe someday that will again be the habit. Who knows?
Now I'm going to Madeline, Brianna, somebody over there. Have any Althea? Who wants to come up with a question? Now that we're on our way, Althea, you have another one. Get in line if you want to, because we're going to be ending, I guess, in 10 minutes. So we have another good 10 minutes. Althea, you're back.
Yeah.
Is Althea there? Oh, there she is.
I think the mic.
You just pulled the microphone.
Oh no!
I got it.
I think I talk loud enough. I think she can hear me. I think I speak loud enough.
Can you?
I can hear her. Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah, I'm
go.
loud. Okay.
Hey, so you want to go next? Okay.
So my question is, considering you're an author who's very educated in literature and things like that, what type of books do you personally choose to read in your free time, and what type of books would you personally recommend for people?
Well, you know, as it happens, right now, I've gone back to rereading some books that meant a great deal to me years ago. And I wouldn't have predicted that because, of course, I like to keep up with new writing. But I do find that there is something about the test of time. You know, books that are still around after 100 years or 50 years really have something to offer to us. And right now, I'm rereading several books that meant a great deal to me years ago. And one of them is Crime and Punishment, which I know, Althea, isn't it you who's reading Crime and Punishment?
Yeah, that's me. I'm also the one reading War and Peace.
Yeah, and War and Peace. I haven't read War and Peace for a long time. So I hope you will not be dismayed that books that were written some while ago are big, long books. We get sort of feeling like we can't read anything that's more than 200 pages long. But if you're telling a big story, it's hard to jam it in to 200 pages. If you're talking about War and Peace, the way Tolstoy is, you're just going to have to write a long book. So I would really urge you to look into the past and see what you can find there is of interest to you.
Thank you very much. Asa?
So, what was the moment or the event that inspired you to write this story, and what are you hoping readers will take away?
I hope they would take away a much more complicated and nuanced version of the Shawnee Indian. I would hope that they would never again call a Native American a savage or a heathen. I think we need to really penetrate through the prejudice that has obscured our understanding of Native Americans, as Margaret did. She came away finally with a very different impression of these people than she'd had going in. You remember at the very beginning when she's first picked up, she does use words like savage, barbarian. She calls the women squaws, which is not something the tribes ever would have used. So I'm hoping that would be the effect. That's asking a lot. We have generations of prejudice to deal with Native Americans, as we do with African Americans and a lot of other, what we would call minorities. They don't think of themselves as minorities. They have no reason to think of themselves as minorities. It takes a long time to get through those prejudices, but we have to do it because we all have to live together. We can't be separated from other people. We depend on other people. So that would be my hope.
So, and due to all of that, due to the depiction of Native Americans, the accurate depiction of Native Americans and captives, Captives is such an impactful and powerful story, especially for people of color who feel represented because of this story and they feel. Have you given any thought to the idea of making Captives a film to reach a wider audience?
A film? Is that the question? Yeah, I would love to see it turned into a film. I don't have any access to that world, so I don't. It's not something I can cause to happen. And the other thing that tends to happen is that when a book is optioned, at least by a Hollywood studio, the writer loses all control. You're not going to write the script. You're not going to have any influence on the way the script is written. So it can end up being not at all what the book is like. It can be a really completely different version, and sometimes that's quite disappointing. In fact, in the coffee shop I go to near here, there, which also sells books, there are two little wooden boxes, and one says better than the movie or worse than the movie. About any movie you might have seen that's based on a book. And so, it's like everything, it's a two-edged sword. If someone who really understood what I was trying to do wanted to make a movie, that would be terrific. There have been a few that have treated Native Americans with some sympathy and understanding. But Hollywood, as we know, is governed by money making. And that means we're still going to continue to get all these white male heroes. They're not really heroes, but central characters, and everybody else is pushed back into the shadows. So I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. Maybe it will one day.
Questions? Anybody else out there? Jeremiah, Ali, Brianna, Madeline?
I have a question.
Oh,
It's not
Madeline?
on the list, but
Okay, come on over. We have about 5 more. And our wonderful representatives from the school district, if you have anything you would like to ask or say too.
We have 9
Wait.
minutes, Dr. Bellas.
How many?
9 minutes.
Okay, let's do it. Ali, go ahead, my friend.
About how long did it take you to get the full story of your great grandmother?
Well, she's probably my great grandmother. It's a long time back. I first heard about her story when I was around your age, because there was a letter, and you remember that's mentioned in the beginning of the novel. There was a letter sent to my mother and to my 2 older brothers that described this event and included Margaret's own version of what had happened to her. But at that point, I had no idea that I was going to write about it. I was just beginning my career as a writer, so I probably felt it was a little too ambitious. It was really 3 years ago. I live in the part of the country where we have a great deal of Native American influence in the community. The Pueblo Indians have their towns all around Santa Fe. We know some of them quite well. We go to their ceremonials. We know their music. And that alerted me to the fact that the tribes back in the part of the country I come from, Kentucky, West Virginia, also had stories to tell. And then I immediately thought about Margaret and her story. And of course, I had to do a great deal of reading, as you will understand, to try to learn something about the Shawnee. I didn't know anything about the Shawnees setting out. They were a rather small tribe. They were almost completely stamped out by white people. There's still a small settlement in Oklahoma of what the remnant that was left. So it took a lot of reading and thinking to begin to have some idea what these people would have been like in the 18th century. And also a lot of reading about the colonists and what that life would have been like, and particularly the treatment of women. So it's been about a 3-year writing and researching, but actually thinking about it began many years ago.
Very good. Sallie, can you tell us a little bit about how many drafts you've made? That is what we're reading now, and this is of course talking about rereading, rewriting, because as language arts teachers, people don't want to hear, please rewrite that or please reread it. But I like that. But I want to hear about how many drafts this is, and before you're even ready to let somebody read a pre.
Right. Well, you know, some writers said that the way you define a writer is the amount of revising the writer is willing to do. Nobody likes to do it. We'd all like to have our first draft just be perfect and not have to go on working on it. But you're going to have to put anything you write, I don't care whether it's a short story or essay or a poem, through at least 3 drafts. Now that I do everything on a computer screen, of course, I don't have those earlier versions the way I would have when we were correcting everything by hand and then retyping it, if you can imagine anything worse. But I think this manuscript has probably been through 5 drafts. And you are among the first people to read it. I've had a couple of friends who read it, but it hasn't yet really gone out to publishers. That'll be the next step. So I haven't yet had any other official kind of reaction to it. But I would say everything I write probably goes through about 5 drafts.
Madeline, you reacted quite strongly to the book when I was talking to you. What are some of your impressions of the book, having just read it? She was mentioning, did you want to?
I'm not really sure.
She was telling me in the courtyard how she was really impressed with the packets, the poultices, the herbs that Margaret used. Some of the details, the wampum belt. There were so many nice little details in this script.
Yes, and thank you. I'm glad you asked that. As we all know, herbal remedies were very important 200 years ago. There weren't the kind of pharmaceuticals that we have now. If you got sick, you were probably going to depend on usually an older woman in your community who had probably learned from her mother which herbs would work made into a tea for a bad cough, what herbs would work even if you had broken a limb, just to help you with the pain. And so Margaret had learned a good deal of this from her mother. You remember when they're leaving, her mother hands her a little pouch with a lot of dried herbs in it. And that's really her medicine chest. That's what she's going to carry into the wilderness and begin to first use it and then to collect other herbs that she could dry and use. And it's just an essential part of healing. I think even today, we would all be a lot better off if we had had the use of some herbal remedies. Some of you may have a relative who knows about herbs. There are still people around who haven't completely forgotten that wisdom. And we're beginning to understand that the drug companies are not going to be able to help us with everything. Their motivation is to make money, and therefore they're selling things that don't help us, as you all know, with the opioid crisis. So hoping we get back to more herbal-based medicines.
That was a consistency with Margaret's own home and with her tribe. Sallie, when we talked to you last year, I was just so impressed with when you said, if you have a story, will you tell us that one more time? No one's going to tell the story unless you tell it yourself.
Yes. You know, that's true of anything you write. There won't be anybody else to tell it. Other people haven't had your experience. Other people haven't had my experience. Your voice is essential if the story is ever going to be heard or read. We have to remind ourselves of that because the world doesn't tell us that a great deal. But we need to remember that if you care about a story, if you really hope it will not be lost, then you really have an obligation to write it. And then at least a few people, maybe not hundreds of people, but at least a few people will learn this story and pass it along, and it won't be lost. Very important because the stories are what make our civilization. And we're still losing way too many stories written by people that this culture doesn't consider important. Those are the most important stories of all. So I'm hoping you will really be brave and courageous about moving forward with your writing and being assured that whatever you write needs to be written because nobody else is going to write it.
Sallie, the bell is about to ring.
Right.
Really want to take a moment to thank you sincerely for taking the time to come speak with us here at Kristen McAuliffe Middle School in Boynton Beach, Florida. It's very incredibly gracious and kind of you. And I'm very excited about your new book, Little Brother. I can't wait to read it. And we are very excited about Captives. And you all were asking me, make sure there's it's a good book, and it really is. It's a great book. I really love it. It helped me. Juliana?
Yeah, I'm what you call a strict romance and fantasy reader, and this book was simply amazing for me, and not just because I wasn't entertained by dragons and sirens, but because when I put the book down and I looked around me, I could see people that were the product of that history. I could see friends reflected in the pages of this book, and I thought that was so powerful and impactful. And I want to thank you so much for writing this book.
Well, thank you so much. You all have been wonderful. I love your questions. I love the fact that you care about this manuscript. Now, the next thing is all of you should get on a plane and go to New York and make a tour of all the publishers and say, you've got to publish this book.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll be sending them a little letter. Well, Juliana wants to be a copy editor when she grows up. So we were talking about that.
Thank you.
Sallie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, all of you. It's been a real privilege to talk with you and hear from you. And I hope maybe we have another chance sometime in the future. Alexander, thank you so much for making this happen. Juliana, just a pleasure to have you in this meeting. And all of you, congratulations. And remember, what you're writing matters. So don't get discouraged. Just keep on pushing. That's what you have to do.
Keep on pushing.